Hard Times by Charles Dickens. This is a summary of the first book, Sowing, The Facts. Book 1, Chapter 1, page 9. Now what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else, and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to facts, sir. From here, Charles Dickens conveys Mr. Gradgrind to be an individual who is solely focused on and persuaded by hard, cold, objective facts. Facts are deemed to be the truest way to knowing reality, and thus run into opposition with childlike imagination and wandering curiosity. This is akin to turning the children into autonomous or mere computing machines that input facts and output facts, destroying the creativity that is embedded in the human soul. Later on, we become introduced to Sissy Japet, who Mr. Gradgrind berates for not exactly defining what a horse is as a graminivorous quadruped. Later, we are introduced to Gradgrind's children, Louisa and Tom, who was brought up by their oppressive father and was caught trying to go see the circus. We also meet Mr. Bounderby, a friend of Gradgrind, and a man who loves to brag about how he had nothing and made himself into a banker, factory owner, etc. Mr. Gradgrind and Mr. Bounderby become dissatisfied with the child Sissy in their school and wanted to kick her out, since she was of lower stock, raised by a circus. We come to discover that her dad, who suffers from mental illness and works as a clown in the circus, abandons her, thinking that getting her into school would bring about greater opportunities. Mr. Gradgrind adopts her as his own, ever determined to stamp out childlikeness for the sake of the all-consuming fact industry. Book 1, Chapter 5, page 27 to 28. Coketown, to which Messrs. Bounderby and Gradgrind now walked, was a triumph of fact. It had no greater taint of fancy in it than Miss Gradgrind herself. Let us strike the keynote. Coketown before pursuing our tune. It was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black like the painted face of a savage. It was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves forever and ever, and never got uncoiled. And it had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye, and vast piles of buildings full of windows where there was a rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. It contained several larger streets, all very like one another, and many small streets, still more like one another, inhabited by people equally like one another, who all went in and out at the same hours, same sound, upon the same pavements, to do the same work, and to whom every day was the same as yesterday and tomorrow, and every year the counterpart of the last and the next. These attributes of Coketown were in the main inseparable from the work by which it was sustained. Against them were to be set off comforts of life which found their way all over the world, and elegancies of life which we will not ask how much, of a fine lady who could scarcely bear to hear the place mentioned. The rest of its features were voluntary, and they were these. From this passage, you can see the monotony of industrial life, how the working class endure poor conditions, poor air quality, and poor standards of living. This runs counter to romanticist notions of connecting with nature, emotions, and other ideals like the noble savage, since man in this case are chained to their geography, which has become a jungle of chimneys, pollution, and continual working of the machines. Such are the toils of an industrial man in an industrial age. The Hands. Chapter 10, page 65 to 66. In the hardest working part of Coketown, in the innermost fortifications of that ugly citadel, where nature was as strongly bricked out as killing airs and gases were bricked in, at the heart of the labyrinth of narrow courts upon courts and closed streets upon streets, which had come into existence piecemeal, every piece in a violent hurry for some man's purpose, and the whole an unnatural family shouldering and trampling and pressing one another to death, and the last close nook of this real exhausted receiver, which the chimneys for want of air to make a draught were built in an immense variety of stunted and crooked shapes, as though every house put out a sign of the kind of people who might be expected to be born in it, among the multitude of Coketown, generically called the Hands, a race who would have found more favour with some people if Providence had seen fit to make them only hands, or like the lowest creatures of the seashore, only hands and stomachs, lived a certain Stephen Blackpool, 40 years of age. From here you can see obvious dehumanization of the workforce of Coketown. The people are interpreted as mere hands and stomachs, workers to whom produce goods and services, and consumers who consume the aforementioned produce. The book later introduces Stephen as an average worker with an unfortunate disposition, having married a drunkard and gambling addict wife, to whom most of the money is squandered away. Stephen desires divorce, something that has great stigma and only the wealthy could perform, since it needs to go through the courts. Not even the calculators. Chapter 11, page 71. Stephen bent over his loom, quiet, watchful, and steady. A special contrast, as every man was in the forest of looms where Stephen worked, to the crashing, smashing, tearing piece of mechanism at which he laboured. Never fear, good people, of an anxious turn of mind, that art will consign nature to oblivion. Set anywhere side by side the work of God and the work of many, and the former, even though it be a troop of hands of very small account, will gain in dignity from the comparison. So many hundred hands in this mill, so many hundred horse steam power. It is known to the force of a single pound weight what the engine will do, but not all the calculators of the national debt can tell me the capacity for good or evil, for love or hatred, for patriotism or discontent, for the decomposition of virtue into vice, or the reverse at any single moment in the soul of one of these its quiet servants. With the composed faces and the regulated actions, there is no mystery in it. There is an unfathomable mystery in the meanest of them forever. Supposing we were to reserve our arithmetic for material objects and to govern these awful unknown quantities by other means. Charles Dickens makes an excellent point in contrasting the mechanical and heartless world of facts and industry with that of the things of the soul, where the virtue or vices, characters or qualities which cannot simply be measured in a test tube, cannot be quantified in a laboratory, and cannot be truly reproduced by any industrial enterprise. Dickens reflects on the work of God and nature, to which humans are imago Dei, made in God's image, but in the industrial age are little more than thousands of working hands, made to produce clothing and apparel, with the assistance of the power of steam. The importance and meaning of life becomes relegated to perpetual servitude, as to put food on the table, clothing on bodies, and a roof over one's head. Stephen petitions to Bounderby, his boss, to support divorce, to which his boss dislikes. Stephen meets with an old woman from the country who visits the town to see his boss, and they reflect on the impressive industrial complex that his boss is the head of, truly a great manufacturer. Meanwhile, the children are becoming adults. The 50-year-old Bounderby proposes to marry the 20-year-old Louisa. Age differences aside, Louisa is persuaded by her father to marry Bounderby, since she knows no other man. This is unfortunate, wherein she knows no other due to the fact that her father suppresses any other opportunity for going out, taking fancy, or in talking about things other than matters of fact. Louisa Reflects, chapter 15, page 100 to 101. "What do I know, father," said Louisa in her quiet manner, "of tastes and fancies, of aspirations and affections, of all that part of my nature in which such light things might have been nourished. What escape have I had from problems that could be demonstrated and realities that could be grasped? As she said it, she unconsciously closed her hand, as if upon a solid object, and slowly opened it, as though she were releasing dust or ash. "My dear," asserted her eminently practical parent. "Quite true. Quite true. Why, father?" she pursued. What a strange question to ask me, the baby preference that even I have heard of as common among children has never had its innocent resting place in my breast. You have been so careful of me that I never had a child's heart. You have trained me so well that I never dreamed a child's dream. You have dealt so wisely with me, father, from my cradle to this hour, that I never had a child's belief or a child's fear. Mr. Gradgrind appears so proud and happy by this, and Louisa gives in to his wishes to marry her to his friend Mr. Bounderby. This, however, should be interpreted as an immediate warning sign to anyone with an ounce of secure emotional development, for Louisa recounts the suppression of her own childhood to all-consuming fact, and thus never having the dream, heart, and fear of a child, not knowing truly how to relate to people on an emotional level, but jumping straight to the rigid formalities and formal operations of adulthood. The point of childhood is to experience and know how to manage one's emotions and experiences, something which Louisa truly lacks and does not understand, thus resulting in further pain and misery, this time bounded by holy matrimony. Therefore, this concludes my summary of the Book of Sowing in Charles Dickens' Hard Time. In retrospect, it reminds me of the classic struggle between empiricism, objectivity, and the mathematics, statistics, and the sciences. This runs in contrast with the humanities, with the soul, things that derive from the heart. So thus you can see the conflict between Romanticism and industry, between what you can think and what you can feel, between the mind and the heart. And this conflict, of course, endures now, and whether it be in logic and reason as opposed to feelings and emotions, we like to, I guess, make false dichotomies that these run opposite to each other, when in fact they are both important and are required, that are necessary in knowing, understanding more of this world and relating to one another. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.